pleasure to speak with you. Um, had a chance to read, I didn't read all of it, but I had a chance to read most of this amazing book that you wrote.
Oh, thank
Before we
you.
get into that, we should talk about a little bit of your history because there's a reason why this book is so connected with the things that you in particular has championed over the years.
Sure, I'd love that. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Talk a little bit about your life and the things that you've accomplished, because it really is important connecting with this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe some of your listeners might be familiar with the work that I've done with Black Lives Matter Canada and doing work to try to advance some significant actual policy changes and cultural changes with respect to anti-Black racism in Canada in particular. Before that, I was doing a lot of education activism, and I found myself, um, as a student who is having difficulty affording post-secondary education. I found myself realizing that there was so much more to the problems in education, and that a lot of that had to do with racism and anti-Black racism. And as I started to get involved with that, both academically and with respect to advocacy, trying to change the reality in my communities, I realized there's so many urgent problems, really, really urgent problems that really are about how our lives are consistently interrupted, and the system doesn't seem to care about it. In fact, the system allows for it to continue. And so I have, at this point, really dedicated a large part of my life to trying to confront um, that the way that anti-Black racism is given permission to continue to interrupt our lives.
Well, let's get to the book then, because that's what's so important. And I want to know the inspiration, what made you decide to write this? What is the book called and what is it about?
So the book is called Defund: Black Lives, Policing, and Safety for All. And the book is about how we can action some of those things that we were really talking about a lot in 2020, how we can change and transform our society to create a society that, first of all, doesn't see police targeting and harming Black communities, but also that is a safer, more secure society for all of us, which, as I lay out really clearly in the book, policing does not accomplish. And so, wanting to have people understand, one, why policing isn't accomplishing it, two, why policing won't accomplish it, and what we can do to actually create those conditions of safety that we all want to be living under.
Now, as somebody who is much older than you, who's been on this planet a lot longer than you, I understand everything that you wrote because I've lived it in so many different ways. But how do you write this book to try to get somebody who is not Black understand what you are writing? Because the second you say, "Fund the police," immediately people are just there. You're going to have people who are just like, "Why are you doing that? That's wrong. That's, you're a horrible person," and things like that. How did you write it in a way where, like I said, um, somebody who's not Black can understand what you are saying and at least think about what you wrote?
I mean, I hope so. I am Black, so it's hard to judge whether or not
Yes.
somebody can put themselves in that place. But what I would say to people who may be listening who are not Black and who may be curious about that, one is it is in these moments of feeling really uncomfortable, I find that we learn the most.
Yeah.
Like think back to something that even when you were in school, like think back to learning about something that really opened up your mind. When you feel a level of discomfort, it's often a good idea to just sit with it and open up your mind a little bit and try to understand what's putting you there. Because it might be a lack of understanding, it might be that there's something to learn. The other thing is, what I really tried to do with this book is it's not just a book of like data and numbers. It is a book of stories. because I find that people really do understand issues more when you tell them a story that really brings to life what the issues are. And so one of the first stories that I told in the book is this experience I had with some of my Black Lives Matter colleagues, where after an event one night, there was a lot of police around because they had been following us around the city. And even though we had just had like a vigil for someone who had just been killed by police, Abdirahman Abdi, the police were there when we exited the venue. And we see a Black man running down the street, crying. And everybody turns to, because this is a bit of a commotion, but the police, they get on their bicycles, they start brandishing their batons, they start taking out their weapons, and they start running after and yelling at this man, stop, stop, stop. And they go as though they're about to apprehend him. And so a couple of my friends, the man collapsed on the ground. He's still screaming and he's crying, wailing. And a couple of my friends, they get on top of him to try to protect him from the police who have their batons out and have surrounded him. And myself and another colleague are like, what are you guys doing? Like, what has this man done? Why are you trying to attack him? And they threaten us with arrest for obstructing justice. Right after that, another person comes running down the street, a woman, and she's like, what's going on? Why are all these police here? This is my friend. He just watched his mother die in his arms and ran out into the street inconsolable. And, as she's trying to take in the situation, she thanks us for protecting him. He regains his composure, thanks us as well. And the police just kind of awkwardly put their weapons away and slink away. And, I often wonder what would have happened if we weren't there that night to that man. And I think that story really lays out, like, look, the police, they are trained to see us, if we're not acting in a particular way, as a threat. And the tools that they have are tools of violence. And it may be the case that what we need is something else entirely. It may be that we need support. It may be that we just need someone to look at us and our humanity and help us through a situation. And I hope that someone who's not Black, who hasn't lived it, can look at a story like that and say, oh yeah, there's something here. How can you not,
For somebody who, at the age of 18, was arrested for the most ridiculous thing by two police officers, I, again, can completely relate to that story. And this was the 80s when this happened. We're talking today. When you directly talk about the police being trained on this, you will have people who will say, that's, that's ridiculous. That's crap. Prove that. What do you say to that?
I mean, I can prove it. I've put it in the book. Put in
Mhm.
the book the instances of how they are trained to see us as a threat. But beyond all of that, like let's wash that away. If
Yeah.
you don't want to believe it, if you want to believe something different, why don't we start from what is it that the police are doing well? Let's start there. What is the thing that they are succeeding at, excelling at? And why is it that year after year, our politicians, let's look at the last federal election, are promising to be tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime, but no one's ever saying, I solved that issue with crime and safety. Why is it that policing is the only agency, public service agency, that hasn't been subject to cuts like healthcare, education, and other really critical services that we need are? But policing seems to get more funding year after year after year, despite the fact that it isn't having an impact on whether or not we feel safe, are safe, or crime rates. Like what's the disconnect there?
Um,
So I just want somebody to tell me something that the police are doing really well. And then maybe we could start there.
And I just told you about it. Sort of talked around an incident that happened to me back in the 80s. I know a family that these things have happened in the 60s and 70s. We are now in 2025. What do you hope that writing this is going to help change that in a lot of ways hasn't changed after all these decades?
Oh my goodness. And I'm sorry to hear that you can relate to the stories in the book. But that's the case for so many of us, right?
Yeah.
I am hoping that this book interrupts the cycle because there is a cycle to how this goes, right? There is a incident of police violence that makes it to the mainstream against all odds, that people just cannot fathom how it could happen. They get upset, and there is a flashpoint. There are protests. There are promises by government to deal with whatever the issue is. You know, we can rhyme off names over the years of people who have been at the center of these flashpoints. And then the government or the politicians, policymakers, they will promise to do a study. They will come out with a set of recommendations, maybe one or two of those recommendations, certainly less than 50%, they'll try to implement. The recommendations won't work. Everyone will forget. And about 5 to 10 years later, we're on to the next incident. This is a cycle that has been occurring since the beginning of policing, which is something else I trace in my book. Um, and in fact, straight up to the very first modern paid, uniformed, weaponized police force back in 1795. In the year following, the people were like, no, we don't want this. We're not into it. It's corrupt. It's too expensive. They are harming our communities. And the government at that time did a study and decided that they needed more oversight. And it's as though those things can be written just yesterday. This has been
Mhm.
going on for over 100 years. And so I'm hoping that what this book does is interrupts that cycle and says, okay, can we remember for next time that we actually have been through this before and go straight to a solution that will work rather than doing another study like we don't know what the issues are and attempting to implement something that we've attempted before in the 2010s, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s, and so on, because it's been attempted. It is now time to say we need a fully different approach. And that's what I'm hoping that this book can interrupt that cycle.
I hope so too. I want to say thank you so much for doing this interview with me, but more importantly, I want to say thank you being brave enough to write this and stand by this because that's very important for a population that tends to get ignored when these situations happen. Thank you so much for this interview.
Hey, thanks for having me.